Okay, we are going to get going here. Welcome everyone to the Ocean Encounters virtual series from Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute. I'm Barbara Moran. I am the environmental editor at WHOI, Boston's NPR station. It is my privilege to welcome NASA astronaut Sunita Sunny Williams, a retired captain in the US Navy, and Tim Shank, a deep sea biologist at the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute. Our presentation this evening is called Exploring Inner and Outer Space. Very quickly, I'd like to get a sense for where people are tuning in today. If you've joined us on Zoom, you should see a pop-up poll come up on your screen in a second, asking you to tell us where you live. I think we probably have quite a few people from the Northeast, but we'd love to hear if you're from the Midwest or the West Coast or out of the country. I know the poll isn't perfect, but just pick the one that's closest to you. Is the poll up? Yes? Okay. All right, while the poll is, oh, there it goes, there's the poll, yay! All right, so click on where you're from. So I know it's not 100% perfect, but please click on where you're from. While you're doing that poll, we'll do a little housekeeping. If you're watching us on Zoom, you'll be able to ask questions by clicking on the Q&A button down on the bottom of the Zoom screen. And typing your question in the window that appears. We've deactivated the chat for this in order to have all the questions go through the Q&A so that we can collect all your questions. If you're on Facebook, you can type your questions directly into the comments. Either way, our team will try to answer you or relay your questions to me. And if we don't get to your question while we're live, our goal will be to answer them right after the program. We're going to answer the questions at the end of the program after both speakers have presented. And we're also going to be recording this event and we'll present it or post it online later. Okay, so we have poll results. Okay, let's see, we got, I have to put my glasses on for this. Poll results, Northeast is the big winner, 65%, but look at this, we got people from all over the place. Great Plains, Midwest, a good showing from the West Coast, and even 9% from outside the US. That's fantastic. Well, welcome everybody. I'm so glad so many people are here. And thank you, Sunny and Tim, and thank you to everybody who is here today. Before we hear from Sunny and Tim, I wanted you to see them in action. So we have a short video clip from a conversation between Sunny and Tim. This is when he is 2 miles under the water during this clip, and she is 250 miles up above the earth. So let's watch this.
Hey, I'm looking at some questions here from kids around the world. One of them has to do with alien life forms. We haven't seen anything up here, but I'm sure you've seen stuff that looks pretty weird down there. Over?
Yeah, absolutely, Sunny. Some of the life forms we see down here are rival those that you might think of as being aliens. We've got 10-foot long tube worms down here that have no eyes, no mouth, no gut, but yet they thrive here amongst chemicals coming out of the seafloor through heat generated deep inside the earth. It's as close as you can come to being in another world. I'm sure likewise you've got some fantastic observations that you're making, some experiments you're doing, and we'd sort of like to hear more about those things. Can you tell me where you are right now, circling above the Earth?
Well, Tim, up here we're doing a bunch of experiments. It seems a little bit probably more like normal life on a daily basis. We get up in the morning around 8 o'clock and eat breakfast together. This is a long duration mission for us, about 6 months up here, so it's a little bit more like daily life. And primarily our experiments are working on the human body and how it's going to maintain life in space, in microgravity, so when we go to different places, back to the moon or to Mars, we'll be able to know how to live and how the body reacts and be able to be productive human beings. Over?
Yes, it seems like we're both studying life in extreme environments, different ends of the spectrum.
Cool, so that was cool. That was part of the longest long distance call ever from outer space down to the deep ocean. That was in 2007. Each was in their own element. Tim was on the floor of the Pacific Ocean in Alvin, and Sunny was orbiting the Earth above the International Space Station. So Sunny and Tim are two of the people on Earth who have ventured into some of the most remote and challenging environments for humans anywhere. As an astronaut, Sunny has flown in the International Space Station twice, once as commander, and spent over 50 hours on spacewalks outside the station, which is amazing. Tim has dived to the deep sea floor dozens of times, including more than 50 dives in the research submersible Alvin, in order to study what lives in the extreme depths of the ocean. Oh, there he is, picture of him getting into Alvin. To explore both the inner and outer space, they need specialized tools, rigorous planning, and the support of a highly skilled team. Tonight, Sunny and Tim will continue their conversation with all of us. We're going to start with Sunny. She was selected to the 17th astronaut class of NASA in 1998, and she is a veteran of 2 missions to the International Space Station. She's currently training for the first post-certification mission of Boeing's Starliner spacecraft, the second crewed flight for that vehicle, as well as her 3rd long-duration mission above the International Space Station, which I can't wait to hear more about. Sunny and her crewmates are working closely with Boeing to develop their new spacecraft systems, which will provide round-trip crew transportation to the International Space Station, and along with SpaceX's Crew Dragon, will return the ability to launch humans into space from US soil. All right, so Sunny is gonna talk to us a little bit about her work and the space exploration. Take it away, Sunny.
Well, thank you, Barbara, and thank you everybody for coming and joining in with us. You know, Tim and I have been friends for a long time. There's a lot we have in common. We've been exploring a lot, and I think there's a lot of years that have gone by, and maybe we're exploring a little bit about our gray hair or lack of hair, or the size of our bellies, how they're growing a little bit. But you know, that just comes with age. There's lots of exploration going around, and I think a lot of people get it. But hey, you know, one of the things that we have both been is we've been part of teams, and it's pretty cool. You know, we wouldn't be doing the things we're doing without a ton of people behind us and putting us on the cutting edge. And so what I want to talk about tonight is teams. Barbara, you mentioned a couple of them already, and I have a 3rd one that I want to talk about as well. So maybe we can start with my slides, if that's okay. Make me a little smaller, which is good. You can't see my gray hair that way. So exploration, you know, this is what we do, and we do it as teams. We do it as human beings. We're doing it right now as a planet with this crazy time that we're living through right now. You know, we're trying to understand and discover how we can make this planet and humanity a little bit better. So part of the teams that I've been on, like Barbara, you mentioned before, are the Space Shuttle team and the Russian Soyuz team, which took me up to the International Space Station. So I've had some background, you know, I see there's a lot of people from New England, and, you know, experience is good. Sometimes experience has to leave. Speaking of maybe Tom Brady, leave to go to another team and help that other team work a little bit better. So I've had the pleasure for the last 5 years of working with the Commercial Crew Program, as it's called. So that was providing funding and resources and requirements to 2 companies, and letting these companies go and be all they can be, and design spacecraft to go to low Earth orbit their way, their own way. So like I mentioned, like Barbara quickly mentioned, I've been working with SpaceX primarily the last couple of years. I'm sorry, Boeing the last couple of years, but SpaceX before that, since 2015. So these are the spacecraft. I'm going to start with the SpaceX team, because this last year, next slide, this last year has been pretty exciting. This was just a little over a year ago, last March in 2019, as the SpaceX team was getting ready to launch their Dragon 2 to the International Space Station. It's an unmanned spacecraft, but you can see there's 2 guys in their blue flight suits there. That's Doug and Bob. They will be the first 2 to actually ride on this spacecraft to go to the International Space Station. And spoiler alert, I'll say it again at the end of my SpaceX spiel, but they're getting ready to launch at the end of May. So in 1 month, we'll hopefully see them getting on their capsule. So it's not a simple ordeal. Like I mentioned, we just as NASA astronauts have been working with them for 5 years before, just to get them to this point. And they finally, like I said, 1 year ago, launched the spacecraft and got it up to the International Space Station. It was the first one to launch and dock to the International Space Station, first company, and a new docking port. So the shuttle had docked to the front of the space station, the Soyuz docked to the back of the space station. We had to put a new docking adapter on the space station to allow these new spacecraft to come up and dock. So you can go to the next slide. You could see it was a pretty exciting event for the guys inside the space station to be the ones to open up the hatch and smell the brand new car smell as this spacecraft finally got all the way up there. And that's no small feat. That's not just a launch from Kennedy Space Center, but also that whole rendezvous process. I'm highlighting that for a reason. I'll tell you a little bit about that later. So that spacecraft came back and landed in the ocean, in the Atlantic Ocean. Our fearless compadres, Doug and Bob, went out on the ship so they could see how they will be recovered when they land after their mission coming up soon. And it's similar to what WHOI has, Woods Hole has. It's a ship with an A-frame, a medical department to take care of the guys as they come back. Remember, there will be a long duration space mission when these guys actually, when this spacecraft will be going regularly, so they'll need a little bit of help when they're getting out of the spacecraft. Then the ship will either drive into the beach, into the shore, or they might be taken back with a helicopter. Just to talk a little bit more about this spacecraft and how it's getting to space, you probably heard of Mr. Musk and his company and the Falcon 9 rocket. You see two of them in the hangar bay here. They look a little used, a little charred. They're pretty cool. This is a really cool concept where these rockets actually can come back and fly themselves back, land on a landing pad at Kennedy Space Center or on a barge off in the Atlantic Ocean. So pretty amazing technology, which is going to decrease the cost of going to orbit in the future using this type of reusable rocket. So it's a pretty neat concept. Next slide. To get ready for these guys getting ready to go, we have to do a lot of things. I've mentioned team. It's not just us by ourselves, alone and afraid, walking out to the launch pad. We got a whole launch pad group, as well as the medical folks that are making sure that we're okay, ready to go. And we got to make sure that if anything happens on the launch tower, we can get out of there safely, and our team can get out of there safely. So they had one more milestone before we're all ready to have the meetings to commit them to go. They had to do a day of launch rehearsal. So they got in their spacesuits. You see, these spacesuits are not ones that we've seen sort of in the past. These are brand new in-house made by the SpaceX company. They have a pretty sleek ride out to the launch pad in the Model X over there. So I say this and it's sort of a fun slide to show, but the seriousness of it is the timing. The launch window for the rocket is instantaneous. And so they have to be in their spacesuits without any problems, out to the launch pad without any flat tires or anything like that, and in the space capsule ready to go on time to make sure the fueling of the capsule or the rocket and everything is ready to go as soon as the launch window opens. And they were able to actually, next slide, witness this whole process as well. And when they had their final test, they did an in-flight abort test. So this is different from the space shuttle. These capsules, as well as Soyuz in the past, and our capsuled vehicles in the past, have to get you away from the rocket in case there's anything bad that's going on. And that can be on the launch pad or shortly after takeoff. So they did one last in-flight abort test to go through all the procedures and the communications with the flight controllers, and then they're essentially ready to go. So the final month before those guys get to go. In the meantime, team number 2, which I switched over to just a couple of years ago with my crewmate Josh Cassada, who I think is online out there. We're part of the Boeing Starliner flight test. We'll be the second crew to launch. These guys right here in their fancy flight suits or space suits will be the first guys to go. So we're hoping these guys go in about a year from now, and hopefully Josh and I will go about a year and a half from now. These spacesuits are made at David Clark, so right up the road from where you guys are in Worcester, Massachusetts. So hometown folks. These guys have made a number of spacesuits in the past, and we've been able to use them on different programs in the past. So they're pretty nice spacesuits. They're a little comfortable, a little more slick than the suits in the past, but they're good. So what has the Boeing folks been doing? So just like I mentioned, this team has another launch pad. You know, this is #2 launch pad for people already at Kennedy Space Center, and there's a third one, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. It's pretty cool. If you go to Kennedy Space Center and you go for a drive around, you see 3 crew access towers. So part of the team, like I talked about, is not only the folks that get us ready to go, but all those people who have poured all that cement and made all those facilities ready to go for us. This is the way we would escape from the crew access tower in case we had any type of emergency on the tower and we weren't all strapped into the spacecraft right yet. Next slide. The other things that have been going on, so just like SpaceX, we want to make sure that an abort test, the launch abort test works, the launch abort engines work. So this just happened last year. It was pretty amazing to see a spacecraft just abort itself and land out in the desert. I'll talk a little bit about landing in a minute. We got an extra data point with this test. SpaceX, if you notice, came down with 4 parachutes. Boeing's plan is for 3 parachutes on this test. However, unplanned, only 2 parachute deployed. And so the capsule came down under 2 parachutes instead of 3. So how to make lemonade out of lemons, you know, so that was a good test point, harder than we would actually really want to land with this spacecraft, but you know, it came back without too much problems after just 2 parachutes. So we're feeling pretty good about that. And next slide. And next thing that they've been doing is really looking at the launch or the landing area. Now this is different again than SpaceX. SpaceX is landing in the ocean, like I mentioned, with the A-frame ship that will collect it and bring it back, bring the crew members back. We will actually land on the Starliner in a 4-kilometer circle. It's pretty tight when you think about where we're coming from and how fast we're going. You know, somewhere around 250 miles, 17,500 miles an hour, slowing down to land in a 4-kilometer circle. That's pretty spectacular when you think about it. And we did this, we proved this on our orbital flight test, which just happened last December. Next slide. However, there are cases, of course, when say there's some type of emergency with the capsule and we just gotta come back to Earth. Well, Tim knows, and a lot of people at Woods Hole know, 70% of this planet is ocean, so there's a probability that we might be landing in the ocean. So we practiced our emergency procedures of how we would actually egress the capsule, how the military would come in and help us find the capsule and then get the people out of the capsule and then get us back to safety. So all of these contingencies as well as the nominal profile is something that we've been going through and working through. It's been a pretty busy year, as you could tell. So next slide, what rocket does this one launch on? This launches on the Starliner launches on an Atlas V booster. This is a heritage rocket that's launched many satellites and payloads up to space. But in this case, it's a little different. You can look at the next slide. This is our capsule. Go to the next slide. You can see it's a big blivet, and you got to stick that big blivet on top of that rocket. This blivet is a little bit bigger in diameter, and most other payloads have been big like that, have had a shroud over them and made them aerodynamically pretty stable. Well, when they put this spacecraft on top of this rocket, you could see it doesn't quite marry up. So that white part with the red stripe on it, that's the shroud. That is you know, I look at that as the engineer's dream. Like, how do I solve this problem? How do I make sure that this capsule sitting on this stick doesn't fall off? And there was a lot of extra engineering that went back into this to try to figure this out, because it was a major problem for a lot of time, but we figured it out and we were ready to go. So Next slide. Last thing that I mentioned, or I had quickly mentioned last December, we had a thing called the orbital flight test, which was just like demo one when I started for. These guys, we launched this spacecraft up. It was supposed to rendezvous with the space station and then come back down. Well, the launch was spectacular. That integration to that Atlas V rocket was perfect. The count was perfect. It got up to orbit, and we had a software glitch, particularly in time, and the next burn for the spacecraft to get to circularize it into orbit didn't go on time. As well as we had a lot of communication problems. So this is just like the Dragon capsule, an automated spacecraft, supposed to do a lot of these things by themselves. But when you have little glitches in your software, you got to get in there manually and try to fix that. And Mission Control was having a difficult time sending commands up because of communications. Because of all of that, we ended up losing a little too much propellant trying to fix this problem, and decided not to dock to the space station, but come back and land at our as soon as we had a good landing site. And so the backside of that, the good side of that, was we landed in our 4-kilometer circle without any problems. So two of the most dangerous parts of the mission, the launch and the landing, were spectacular. The middle part with the software, which is automation, is something that we all need to we need to take a little step back. I feel like it was the thrill of victory and the agony of defeat, all wrapped into to one mission. But they're working on it, and like I said, Chris, Nicole, and Spanky should be launching hopefully in a year from now, and Josh and I in about a year and a half. So there's, if you could tell, that's Josh and me on the left-hand side, and our compadres Victor and Mike Hopkins on the right. So in the meantime, while those other guys are getting ready for their test flight, we've been working on the training template for the future crews to come, because these spacecraft will continually be providing a human presence to the International Space Station. So what does that mean? And go on to the next slide. We still have to make sure that we're ready to do anything that the space station asks us to do. We have a robotic arm up there that has the ability to capture, grab out of the sky other logistics spacecraft, so we have to be proficient in that. We have to do, next slide, we continually work on our spacewalking capability. We're doing all sorts of new additions to the International Space Station externally, new batteries, new more efficient batteries, new more efficient solar arrays. All of this is part of a bigger plan to understand how new things work in space. I'm going to stop here for just a second on this slide, because there has been like an amazing amount of work in parachute development over the last year. And this spacecraft is the next team I wanted to talk about, which is Orion. So Orion is NASA's bigger spacecraft. It's actually about 1 meter bigger in diameter, and it will be launching hopefully before too long. And this is the spacecraft that's going to take us back in the vicinity of the moon, and then with the rover eventually to the moon. So we've been working on Orion for quite some time with its rocket, the Space Launch System, which is the biggest rocket. It'll be as big as the Saturn V to launch this spacecraft up toward the moon. But we've been working with the other companies as well as Orion on these parachutes. You know, some of these parachute companies have been around for 100 years, and we're still learning new things about interactions of multiple parachutes. So this development is pretty key in our future. You know, you can have a successful mission, but you sort of need to land softly at the end of it. So the parachute thing is a pretty big deal.
Suni, on that, we're gonna stop you there, because we want to make sure we have time for Tim and some questions at the end. And I think that's a good stopping point to think about landing at the end with the parachutes. So we're gonna switch over, I think, to Tim for a second. Before Tim steps up, we wanted to do another quick little poll for all the audience members about outer space and inner space. So the question is, which should pop up on your screen in a minute, I think. The question is, what do you think is greater, the number of people who have walked on the moon, or the number of people who have visited the deepest part of the ocean at Challenger Deep in the Mariana Trench. Okay, so what more? More people on the moon or more people way in the deep? We should have a poll coming up in a second that everybody can answer, that if you're on Zoom. Okay, come on. All right, you have to think about it. All right, you have to think about that. The poll's going to come up after Tim talks. Okay, so, and you can think about it, and while Tim's talking, you can see what you think is easier. All right, so next up we have Tim Shank. He's a deep sea biologist, an associate scientist in the biology department, and former director of the Ocean Exploration Institute at the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. He's known for his research on the ecology and evolution of animals that live near deep sea hydrothermal vents, on seamounts, and in underwater canyons and trenches. He's conducted more than 60 scientific expeditions in the Arctic, Atlantic, Pacific, and Indian Oceans. That's almost all the oceans, I think, and has completed more than 50 dives on the research submersible Alvin. He's also conducted more than 100 dives with autonomous underwater and remotely operated vehicles, including the first use of a one-of-a-kind remotely automated vehicle in some of the ocean's deepest trenches. I know he's going to talk about that. He's the author of the award-winning best-selling book, Discovering the Deep. All right, Tim, thank you for being with us here this evening.
Oh, thank you so much, Barbara. And let me just start with addressing Sunny for a second, just because I've really appreciated over the last 13 years your commitment to exploration, technology development, and teamwork, and you're spot on. We cannot do these things alone. Exploring extreme environments is very difficult. And so when I think back to our conversation 13 years ago, we can start with the first slide. I know we're going to go with time here, but I was actually diving with my graduate student on the world's largest volcanic mountain feature on Earth, and it was diving at deep sea hydrothermal vents, and we were exploring the aftermath of a recent volcanic eruption that took place there a couple years earlier, watching the animals recolonize the area. Here you can see a picture of metal laden water coming out of the seafloor, superheated, rushing out, that animals can take advantage of. It's an absolute, I could spend an hour talking about the great adaptations that animal life has had in response to living at vents. And here's just a couple of examples of sort of giant tube worms here in the bottom left that have a new type of hemoglobin to take in the sulfide and bind it up so it doesn't be toxic to them. They have no mouth, no gut, and they thrive in this environment that's so hostile. You have clams up top on the left, the size of dinner plates, and mussels on the right there that have incorporated microbes into their gills so they can flourish there at the vents as well. And here in the bottom right, the one I love the most, I think, is you've got 3 miles down in complete darkness, you've got shrimp that have lost the typical eye that shrimp have, the stalked eyes, and now have this a novel photoreceptor on their back. It's a novel eye, that the white part you see there on the back that exists nowhere else in the animal kingdom. So the discovery of vents in 1977 forever changed the way we think about life on Earth and how it can exist, or life anywhere in the universe for that matter. And here it really was relying on the technology. We learned on the technology that Sunny and I so much appreciate and need to make these kinds of discoveries. And here I wanted to show you very quickly just the major types of vehicles that we use to discover and explore in the deep sea. And you've heard a lot about Alvin. You see it there in the middle of a 3-person submarine with a dedicated pilot. You're sitting in a 6-foot diameter titanium sphere. It has high definition cameras, it has lights and sampling tools and things to do experimentation. It's fantastic. And that coming next year gets us down to about 4 miles deep. If you look to the right, you'll see a remotely operated vehicle. This is an unmanned vehicle that is tethered to a ship. It has all the bells and whistles, let's say, as Alvin does in terms of lights and cameras and whatnot, but it's tethered, so the ship moves and the vehicle moves and they're in tandem. And so you can stay down for a lot longer than just 8 or 10 hours as with Alvin. You can stay down for days at a time. If you look way to the left, you'll see an autonomous underwater vehicle that's called Sentry there. Its maximum depth is 4 miles or so. And that is another class of vehicle that is, you program it on the deck of the ship and you release it into the water. It goes down, it does a pre-programmed mission. And then it completes that mission and comes back to the surface, totally unmanned, and you collect the data when it gets back on board. Those are the 3 major classes. You can see all of them have this depth limit of about 4 miles deep. So what about the rest of the ocean? Because there's almost half the ocean deeper beyond that. And just after the phone call with Sunny, we started developing a new kind of vehicle that was a hybrid between the ROV and an autonomous underwater vehicle. And we call that vehicle Nereus. And after 7 years of working on it and getting it, it did a lot of other missions, but we finally got it to go to a trench in 2014. It went to the Hadal Zone. That's what I want to talk to you about. Next slide. Is a major, unbelievable place called the Hadal Zone. And just the way that the discovery of hydrothermal vents changed forever the way we think about how life can exist. I think that the next place we're going to have to usher a new era in for research and exploration is the Hadal Zone. And so we developed this vehicle to go down there, and you can see I've color coded it here. So you can see that the light blue is 6,000 meters, and then yellow is even deeper to 7,000 and 8,000 meters. But you can see in this part of the Pacific that the Hadal Zone, 6,000 meters and deeper, is actually really aligned with the deep trenches of the Western Pacific. And I put a red star there to show you the Challenger Deep in the Mariana Trench, the deepest spot on Earth. It's a place where people are familiar with. If you take the total area of the Hadal Zone on Earth, some people say it's about the size of Australia, or it's the size of five times the size of Texas, or something like that. It's a vast area. I really don't know how big it is, really, but it's just amazing that when we get down to 6,000, 6,500 meters, the life forms change. We know that much. We have evidence to show that the microbial communities change, the types that are there, and the animals also change. It's a different part of our ocean. It's a different realm. It has different types of species in it with really different novel adaptations, and that's what I want to go study. And so this is an image of the Kermadec Trench off New Zealand. It's a topographic map showing you this purple strike right here is actually 7 miles down. It is the trench axis we're looking at. On the left side in the blue is 4 miles deep as compared to the 7 miles at the purple area. And that blue part, you can start this animation that I have. That blue part is an oceanic plate that's actually moving toward the purple area down below the terrestrial plate that's high above. If that makes sense. What's happening here is the plate that's in the foreground, that piece, these big mountains on it, is diving into the purple area. And it's pushing up the terrestrial plate behind it. You see those long rows of green and yellow that are actually volcanoes that are formed from the formation of that trench. So when those two plates meet, the ocean plate goes underneath under tremendous friction and force. And it's amazing pressure that actually squeezes water out of rock. And it heats up the rock and heats up the water. It forms volcanoes. It causes massive earthquakes and massive tsunamis. These are really dynamic places on our Earth that we cannot get to and explore because we don't have the vehicle yet to do that. If we go to the next slide, I'm going to show you just the bottom at 8,000 meters or 6 miles down at a total of 7. This is the Kermadec Trench. You're seeing rocks and sediment. You're seeing white shrimp-like crustaceans called amphipods, anemones with more than 15 species in this video I'm showing you. There's snails in here. There's large crinoids or feather duster type worms. There's brittle stars on the seafloor here. If I could scoop up that sediment for you right now in my hand, it would have over 100 species in it. It's amazing to listen to the sediments. Even these stalked anemones here were new to us just a few years ago. It's amazing that those stalked anemones, they go all the way down the tube to the rock. They are found in all of the trenches of the world so far at around 8,000 meters, 6 miles down. We really don't understand the patterns yet. We don't understand what's really there. We haven't had enough time there. But with Nereus 6 years ago, we had that first cruise and only cruise that took this footage and gave us the first real insights of how animals are distributed in the trench. Here, if you run this video, just a couple more examples of what we saw at various depths. But we've got a shrimp in the top left we didn't know could live more than 7,000 meters deep. We have a respiring sea star on the bottom left at 6,000 meters. We only see that in the really shallow waters of the ocean. And on the right, full ocean depth, looking at a medusoid jelly that actually has stinging tentacles on it that can eat those small amphipods. You got a polychaete worm crawling around. Amazing animals, lots of diversity, lots of organic material in the trenches we didn't think was there. We were discovering that too. And if we go to the next slide, you know, I want to make sure that I tell you this, in case I run out of time. But I want to tell you about two species that live down in the trenches, and that's the Supergiant Amphipod. It's amazing. If you look over to the scale bar, the 1-inch scale bar, there's a little flea-like thing there. That's normal size of these amphipods in the rest of the deep sea, at hydrothermal vents and other places. But when you come down to the hail zone and then in the trenches, there's gigantism. We don't understand why they're this large. We have no idea, but they are massive. This thing's over a foot long. And if I look at the properties of this amphipod, as well as the next slide showing you the deepest living fish that we see down to 6 miles down, this is a fish that has, it's about a foot long. It has this gel-like substance surrounding the spine. It has a massive liver. We don't understand the function of either of these right now and why they're this way. If you go to the next slide, it'll show you the front of the fish. It has eyes. We don't think that they actually function, but you can see it doesn't really have teeth. What it has at the jaw are 2 bones that push each other together and mash up things like amphipods and other things that it eats. And it'll eat for a few minutes, and then it'll keel over and start sleeping. And it'll sleep for a few minutes, it looks like it's sleeping, and then it wakes back up and things are just totally back to normal again. But the 2 things that are amazing about this amphipod, this giant amphipod and this fish, are that what allows it to live so deep. At 15 or 16,000 pounds per square inch, that's over 1,000 times the pressure on our bodies here as we're speaking. It's enough pressure to squeeze cells inside tissues such that the water gets pushed out of the cell. And water gets pushed out of the cell, things can't function. Proteins can't move around the cell and make enzymes. And they can't do the proper functioning of a proper cell. And so what these species do is they secrete these compounds that go and glob onto the water and hold the water in the cell, leaving the cell whole and intact so that proteins can move around. And so it can live. And so you might say, Tim, why is that even important? But what it's doing is it's defining the limit of life in fish and crustaceans on Earth and how deep they can go on Earth. So it's a way of showing their adaptation to living in this environment. And so what's really neat about this is that they make enough of that compound as they go deeper in the water. So the deeper we see fish, right, down to 6 miles, they are increasing the concentration of this compound, these compounds. There's many of them actually. And so we thought, how much can a cell hold of this compound? Because at some point the cell's going to be too full, it's going to pop. It turns out in fish cells anyway, that 8,200 meters is the depth of the limit of how much of that compound called piezolyte that it can hold. And so we now know we go look for fish that are deeper than 8,200 meters, 8,300, 8,400 meters, and they're not there. And it looks like we've found the adaptation for survival in our deepest parts of our ocean. What's really neat about this is that many of our human diseases, whether it's Alzheimer's or multiple sclerosis, glaucoma, all these are associated with protein dysfunction. Cells start to be compromised or collapse, and the proteins can't make their enzymes. We now believe that some of these piezolyte compounds that we see in the Hadal zone can be used to combat and treat diseases, human diseases like these. In fact, there's now a human trial going on for using these piezolyte compounds in humans for Alzheimer's. So it's an amazing thing, that another reason why we really want to get down to the Hadal zone to see what biomedical properties, these adaptations, that these animals have already solved problems that we haven't. And that's really also why I really want to get down there. If we go to the next slide, I want to show you, because we were out there and had really 4 or 5 successful dives with that Nereus vehicle, that hybrid vehicle. We lost the vehicle at full ocean depth. It imploded. It happens. We had no backup. We are back to square one. And so we currently have no vehicle that can go down to the Hadal zone and do rigorous scientific, systematic work. What we do have is state of the art is what I'm showing you right now. And this is courtesy really of Alan Jamieson, who is the world's expert at building these lander arrays I'm going to describe to you in a second. He's really mastered this art. It's a tripod array made out of metal, and you put on it cameras and lights and other sensors, depth sensor. You can put on traps like lobster traps to collect fish in the giant amphipods. And then you set this on time-lapse mode. You go ahead and you can start it. And there it is. There's a big slab of mackerel here we put on a rod, and we're filming here. This is like over 8,200 meters in the Peru Chile Trench. And you see immediately within minutes, these amphipods come in and start devouring the fish. Sea cucumbers come in. I mean, yeah, all kinds of things come in and just annihilate this on the order of hours. And it's simply telling me and telling us there are adaptations for sensing life down there, to getting to organic material, eating that material, competing with other species to get that food. It's truly astounding. But this, in the bigger picture, is just a pinprick in exploring something the size of Australia. Just like when NASA decided to explore for water on Mars or for life on Mars, they didn't go there and just put a lander down and look right below the lander. They developed a rover system, right? Okay, and so that's what we're looking to do at Hadal Depths. Next slide, please. So what we've done is we've partnered up with Jet Propulsion Lab and NASA. And here you can see us working on the vehicle I'm going to show you in just a minute. That's actually the brain center of the vehicle. That is a 17-inch glass sphere that holds the computer brains, it holds the batteries for the vehicle, it holds the camera systems, all the electronics, and to withstand great pressure. But we got together with JPL and NASA to build this vehicle that I'm happy to introduce tonight to so many of you. The next slide, please. It's a fully autonomous underwater vehicle. It's called Orpheus. It's a new class of AUV that can go anywhere in the world's oceans. It can go to 11 kilometers deep, 7 miles down, and go under the ice in the Arctic, under glaciers, whatever. Instead of being 3.2 tons in weight like Nereus was, this weighs 500 pounds. Instead of being bigger than a Volkswagen bus, it's only 6 feet long. Here you're going to see it being deployed 6 months ago off the research vessel Neil Armstrong in some sea trials. We are putting it in the water. It's off the East Coast here, diving in some deep canyons. And there it is in the water column. We actually had chemical sensors on it along with the camera systems, and we discovered hydrocarbons leaking out of the seafloor in the canyons. Here you can see it's a vehicle that has 4 thrusters. It has 4 LEDs, very powerful light systems. We have HD cameras loaded in the front end of this vehicle. And you'll notice it has legs on it. And normally autonomous vehicles are like torpedoes. They don't want to touch the bottom ever. But in this case, we want it to go explore the Hadal Zone, the seafloor of the Hadal Zone, image it, and sit down on the seafloor and actually do measurements and sample things remotely. It's going to be a very intelligent beast. And we have, there you can see it traversing there. It's only 6 feet long, and at the cost of what it was to build Nereus, we can build many of these. Here's an animation showing you on the seafloor, flying over the seafloor, going and taking images and putting them in a coordinate system I'm going to talk about in a second. And we're going to have multiple of these vehicles. Right now we have 2 of them built. There's an Orpheus and a Eurydice vehicle. Again, we want to have them work in tandem. If we go to the next slide, I want to show you just how we've gone to further our collaboration with JPL and NASA. In February next year, NASA's going to launch another rover mission to Mars. And along with that rover, they're going to put a helicopter with it on the surface of Mars. The helicopter is going to fly out in front of the rover, and it's going to image the Martian surface with overlapping imagery. It's going to connect those into a photo mosaic. It's going to put down a coordinate system, a 3-dimensional coordinate system. Over that, it's going to identify features on the surface of Mars that the rover may want to go to, and NASA will use that to direct the vehicle where to go. We're doing the same thing with Orpheus. In fact, we have the same software. The only 2 vehicles who have that software in the world who can make that coordinate system, make that photo mosaic, and navigate by it. Here, what I've done is I've got video imagery that we took with Nereus in the Kermadec Trench 6 years ago, and I put it into part of the software and made a 3D mosaic of the Kermadec Trench. And we can do this for miles and miles of seafloor in the trenches now, and that's what we're looking to do. The next slide. I should also add, though, right before that, Craig, sorry. It's just another way we're collaborating with JPL, if I have the time to mention it, is it's not just that we want to use each other's software and inform them, each other about what vehicles we're building. We both want to explore oceans on other planetary bodies. We're not the only planet or planetary body in town with an ocean. There are 6 moons in our solar system that actually have oceans on them. They're ice-covered oceans. And so the closest, and I'll be quick, the closest analogous place we have to some of these oceans in our solar system off Earth is the Hadal Zone. The pressures we're going to experience once we get through the ice on these moons is going to be the pressure of the Hadal region. And so we're using each other to help understand what's on the Hadal seafloor. We've got to do it here on Earth first. That is discovering what's living in the Hadal Zone, what's habitable, what's not. Anyway, with these vehicles, we want to build 20 of these vehicles in the next 2 years. We've already got targets of where we want to go and where we want to explore and map, discover new life forms, and usher in the new era of ocean exploration and research. So our first cruise is going to be in 6 months from now. NOAA Ocean Exploration and Research is sponsoring a mission on the Okeanos Explorer vessel to take out 2 of our vehicles and work on that navigation software with JPL. I've got to stop here. I'm way over. But if you want to know more information about it, please go to hadex.whoi.edu or feel free to get in touch with me. Thank you.
That was great. Thank you both. That was so fascinating, both of them. So thank you, Sunny, and thank you, Tim. So do we want to do that? Oh, we got the poll. Woohoo! So now you've seen outer space and inner space. So you've had some time to think about it. So for our audience members out there, you can answer this: which is greater, the number of people who have stood on the moon or the number of people who have visited the deepest part of the ocean? Now, Tim, how do we know that that's the deepest part of the ocean? How do you know?
You know, it starts back in the 1870s when we had the HMS Challenger survey, a 5-year survey that was looking for shallow and deeper parts of the ocean, and they actually discovered the Mariana Trench and the Challenger Deep at that time. We know from density mapping of the surface of the ocean as well from satellites that can give us the approximate depth of things on the seafloor.
Cool, great. All right, it looked like most of our respondents, there we are. Sorry, I have my glasses off. 83% said the moon, which is correct. And what is the exact number here? Sorry, in my papers. 12 people have been in the moon and only 4 have been to the Challenger Deep. So good work, audience. You all know that. All right, let's look at some questions. Sunny, since you had so much more to say, we'll run some of your slides while you're answering questions so that if you want to refer to any of them. We get a lot of questions from kids too, which is great. So I like kid questions. They ask the best questions, I think. So let me just get to some of them. Sorry, that's my hold music. All right. Bassie, who's 9, asks, Tim, you talked about this a little bit, but are there any animals in the deepest part of the ocean? What animals live in the very deepest part, if anything? Yeah,
there are animals that go the full extent of our ocean depth. And they are highly diverse, actually. There's a lot of worms we see. Most of the diversity is in the sediments, actually, that we found so far. And that is mostly worms and other small crustaceans. There are hundreds of species. And just every mission we've had out there has almost doubled the numbers of species that we have. Last year, it was like 400, but we have almost, I think, 2,000 that are undescribed, waiting to be described.
Wow, that's amazing. All right, here's one for each of you. We'll start with Sunny. What do you love best about exploring space and going into space?
You know, my answer has changed over the years. I think earlier, what I liked was like knowing what I was going to do when I was up there and sort of having the answer already there. But I think actually having been to space and having been deemed an observer, I think one of the best things that we can do when we go to space is be surprised. And you know, you don't want to always be surprised, like when
yeah, no kidding.
But when you're doing something and a scientist gives you a problem or an experiment and they think it's going to be this way, but you actually see that it does something else, you know, you and them have worked together and found something new. It's just like Tim going to the depths of the ocean here and finding brand new species. The same thing's happening with experiments up in space. So I think in a controlled way, being surprised is actually a really good thing. It means we're taking that next step.
Right, little surprises.
Yeah.
How about you, Tim? What's your favorite thing about going down there?
It is, you know, it's so cliche to say it's a different world, and you enter into an immersive thing that is, you know, it's. I love the calmness and the focus you're able to have as a human on what you're seeing, and I think the adaptations that I see are so immense down there, and that I'm in awe every time that I go down there. It's an absolute privilege to have done it so many times and to discover so many things. And I've seen a lot. I think one thing that comes to mind is I've actually witnessed the only underwater eruption we've ever seen, about a mile down on a seamount in the Western Pacific, and it erupted right in front of us. And and lava was coming out of the seafloor with hydrogen bubbles, and it chilled instantaneously and went from a liquid magma type phase or lava phase right to rock in mid water, and then fell back down to the seafloor as rock. So I watched new Earth forming, and that is probably a highlight for me.
Were either of you ever scared, or are you always scared when you go up, or what's, I don't know, have you ever had any like really scary moments up there, either of you?
I would say, of course, there's parts of all of it that's a little bit scary, right? Getting on a rocket is pretty scary. First time I went out to launch on the space shuttle, and the whole thing is fueled, and it's like almost feeling like it's alive, and you crawl up into the cockpit, and then you're like, okay, I've done this before, I know what I'm supposed to do, these are calculated risks we're taking, and you know, we have a role to play, and you know, you sort of push that scariness aside. Spacewalks are the same way, opening the door. I mean, you've worked your life to do this. This is what you're wanting to do. And you're part of, like I mentioned, the big team that's going out there to fix something, to put an experiment out there, to do something for the International Space Station and all the people who've worked on it. Yeah, you know, you could let a lot of people down. Not to mention, it's a sort of dangerous environment with just your visor between you and the vastness of space. But you get to work, and you know that you've done the training, you've done all that you needed to do to prepare yourself for that moment to do the best job that you can do. So yeah, there's definitely some scary parts. I don't think anybody should think that it's not scary at times, but it's
Oh, there you are.
It's rewarding. Yeah, that was a fun day.
That does look scary and fun at the same time.
Yes.
Did you want to answer that too, Tim, or do you want to hear it?
I could briefly just say that I was fearful before I dove for the first time. I got an Alvin for a safety check and briefing, and I'm terribly claustrophobic, and I was like horrified. I'm not gonna be able to do this as a graduate student. And I got in the next day, and it was absolute bliss. It was dark and cold, and it was the perfect place to be. And if I were to perish on the deep sea floor, I couldn't be happier, frankly. But to be honest, I have been stuck once on the bottom, and I have had a sort of electrical issue, the smoldering wires and whatnot in the submarine, that I was, we really reacted, and like Sunny said, with the training you have, and responded really well. There wasn't any problem whatsoever. The greatest fear I have really is when you're diving, it's not just to do your own experiment and do what you want at a whimsy. It's you have a real checklist of things you want that people on board the ship who are funded for this research, they want to see get done and need to get done. And so you're on a big team here with deliverables every time you have a dive. So the fear is coming back without having accomplished everything you wanted to accomplish on that dive.
Great. All right, I have two sort of combined questions here. All right, we heard, those of you who heard your phone call, your long distance phone call, said that, Sunny, you didn't see any aliens in space, but do you believe in extraterrestrial life? And Luke, who is 10, is wondering, does studying animals in the deepest part of the ocean help predict what animals on other planets could look like? That's a sort of two-parter question. So do you believe, and if you believe,
yeah.
What are we to see?
I think absolutely. And in our time, in my time as an astronaut, Woods Hole and other people have discovered the hydrothermal vents and really opened, I think, people's eyes to the fact that, yeah, we don't have to be a species that lives and breathes air and gets sunlight on us. There could be some other species out there that's actually alive. I mean, we proved it, right, by going to the trenches and finding these animals. So why couldn't there be other animals on other planets that don't have the exact same chemical makeup as Earth? I mean, it's got to happen. It's got to be there. It's probably in our solar system and some of the oceans of the moons and evidence of water that's been on the planets out here. So I mean, it's got to be. And then you get this amazingly clear view of the universe when you're in space. There's none of this atmosphere that clouds up your eyes, and you can see there's so many billions of stars. And what's the probability? There's got to be a star out there that has a solar system like ours in some form or fashion and has something that lives out there. So absolutely. And I think my opinion maybe has changed over the years because we've learned new and exciting things. And yeah, I believe there's something else out there. It's hard to say the A word, but I believe there's something else out there.
Yeah, I can just chime in briefly to say that absolutely, everywhere that I have looked and think that life could not live here is so inhospitable places that life's there. You can look at a weed that comes through the crack in a sidewalk and believe that's true. So I feel like we study the extreme environments on Earth, like vents and trenches and whatnot, to inform ourselves of what the range of the spectrum of possibilities it could be for life on other planetary bodies. So the main ingredients for hydrothermal venting and life there are a heat source below the seafloor, a rocky seafloor, and a salty ocean above it. That's all you really need. And if you look at like the moon of Europa shown here, okay, to scale with the Earth, there's Europa, the moon of Jupiter. It's got about 12 kilometers, or I don't know what it is, 10 miles of ice above the ocean. And the ocean is 50 miles deep as compared to 7 miles on Earth. And that's going to be really under high pressure. But at the core of Europa, it's a heated interior core because of tidal pulsing. And then you've got a rocky seafloor and you've got a salty ocean above that. That's really all you need. You crack that seafloor open, hot water gets to go up through the cracks, takes chemicals, leaches them out of the rock, and gives them to whatever life can handle them. So to me, I would be surprised, really surprised, if there weren't life on Europa in the ocean.
This is the last question we have time for, but since we're here on Europa, there was a question. Wait, go back to Europa. There was a question about whether we'll ever have spacecraft that can go to Europa and then have an Alvin that can go down in there. Do you think we'll need both of you guys to do this, and then find some of your weird shrimp down there, Tim? So do you think that will ever happen?
That's the plan, right, Tim?
That is absolutely the plan. There's already a plan to have an orbiter go around Europa in the upcoming years, and then following that, there will be a lander like you see here in this graphic. You see the lander on the surface of the ice. You see some sort of a tether, fiber optic system, whatever, going to a vehicle, and what you just saw tonight in Orpheus, the plan is for that to be the great grandmother of whatever vehicle you're seeing here, looking and discovering vents in the ocean of Europa. And that's the point of what we're trying to do. But we have to do it on Earth first. We don't even have a vehicle right now that can go to the Hadal zone and do this kind of exploration and locate vents. That's what we're doing in the next 2 years and beyond. And so absolutely, it's a great question, and it's really important to understand that.
That's great. And Sunny, do you have anything you wanted to add to that?
No, I'm excited for it. And one day we're going to actually have humans leaving or going a little bit farther in our solar system. Just as a point of note, tomorrow we'll be announcing which company is getting the lunar lander. For our next time that we go to the moon in the Artemis program. We'll be hopefully landing people on the moon by 2024, and that's our next step. And then we're going to have a sustained presence there, which is going to allow us to really take that step-by-step process and really understand how we're going to go farther in our solar system. And so we can even ask even more questions. So it's a process. Just something for the kids out there. Not everything is discovered. You have so much more to discover. So I'm excited that you're interested in this and you're looking at STEM and oceanography and aerospace. It's a lot of fun.
That's great. It's a great note to end on too, because I feel like it's nice to think about exploration in space when we're all kind of stuck in our houses. It's nice to have that vision. So I'm afraid that's all we have time for, but thank you, Sunny and Tim, for sharing your experiences with us. Thank you. It's been a wonderful hour. And we wish both of you many more explorations and getting us closer to Europa someday. To all of our listeners, thank you so much for coming, and thanks for the great questions. If you enjoyed this evening's presentation, I hope you tune again next Wednesday at 7:30 p.m. I'll be back here for our next Ocean Encounters Town Hall Science of Shipwrecks with Titanic discoverer and explorer Robert Ballard and WHOI biologist Kirsten Meyer-Kaiser. So thank you again for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your evening. And Tim and Sunny, thank you both so much.
Thanks, Barbara.
Right.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Greetings, Alvin. This is the International Space Station Alpha, flying about 250 miles above the Earth's surface. How do you read us? Over. How do you read us? Over.
Hi, Sunny. Greetings from Earth's deep inner space. This is biologist Tim Shank of the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, and I'm currently sitting over 2,500 meters or 1.5 miles below the surface of the Pacific Ocean inside the deep submergence vehicle Alvin. It's great to hear you today. I'm joined by our pilot, Alvin expedition leader Pat Hickey, who has had more dives in this submarine than anyone else. And we're also joined by Kate Buckman, a graduate student conducting her PhD research during our dive today. Over.
Hey, Tim and the crew down there on Alvin. Just to let you know, there's 3 of us up here. We're coming across the coast of Chile and Argentina in South America. I'm looking out the window at the ocean, hoping you're having a good time out there, down there. Over. Down there. Over.
Yes, we're having a great time today. We're diving on the East Pacific Rise, part of the world's largest volcanically active mountain range. It's 40,000 miles long around the Earth's surface. So we're having a great time down here looking at deep sea hydrothermal vents or springs coming out of the seafloor. Over.